My name is Maribel Renner. I'm 41 years old, and the day my father gave my brother the keys to our family's company, I was holding the potato salad. It was the 50th anniversary cookout for Renner Sons Flooring, out behind the warehouse on Olive Street, the one that sits in the shadow of the old Union Station clock tower here in Texarkana. 110 folding chairs, 200 pounds of brisket, a banner my father paid a sign shop $40 to print, gold letters on navy, 50 years strong. I had ordered the banner. I had ordered the brisket. I had reconciled the catering invoice 3 days before, and I was standing near the drink coolers with a glass bowl on my hip when Dale Renner raised a barbecue sauce-stained hand and called for quiet. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just kept my grandfather's habit of saving everything. And in 6 months, the same people clapping for my brother would vote me into the chair he was sitting in. Here's exactly how a filing cabinet beat a golden boy. My father held up a set of brass keys, the keys to the building, the real ones, the ones that opened the front showroom and the loading dock gate and the gun safe in the back office where we kept the original incorporation papers. He let them catch the sun for a second so everybody could see. 50 years ago, my daddy started this company with one truck and a bad knee, Dale said. His voice was warm. It was always warm in front of a crowd. And there comes a day, a man has to think about what comes next, about legacy. I want you to know I was smiling, genuinely. I thought I knew what came next because I was the one who had drafted the press release for it, sitting in the glass-walled office I'd occupied since I was 19. So today, he said, I'm handing these keys to the next Renner man, to my son, to Tucker. There was a beat where I didn't understand the sentence, the way you don't feel the cut from a clean knife until later. People started clapping before I caught up. My brother Tucker, 36 years old, walked up in his good boots and the linen shirt he wore for showroom days, and he hugged our father, and he held those keys up over his head like he'd won something at a county fair. The bowl was cold against my hip. I remember that. The salad bowl was sweating and my palm was wet, and I kept holding it because if I put it down, I'd have to do something with my hands. And I didn't trust my hands right then. You know the type. The man who calls it legacy with sauce on his fingers and never once does the arithmetic on who actually balanced the books for 30 of those 50 years. I clapped too. I want to be honest about that. I shifted the bowl to my left arm and I brought my hands together, slow, 4 or 5 times, because 200 people were watching and I had spent my whole life being the one who didn't make a scene. My mother taught me that before she passed. A Renner woman keeps the peace. A Renner woman keeps the books and keeps the peace. So I kept both. But this story really starts 27 years before that cookout, at a kitchen table on Wright Patman Lake, where my grandfather Asa Renner sat me down with a shoebox full of receipts when I was 14 years old. Asa founded the company in 1974. One truck, like Dale said, except the bad knee was from Korea, and Asa never once mentioned it for sympathy. He laid hardwood and linoleum across 2 states, because Texarkana is the kind of town where State Line Avenue splits the road right down the middle, and you can stand with one boot in Texas and one in Arkansas. Asa worked both sides. He used to say, the floor doesn't care what state it's in, son. It just needs to be level and it needs to be honest. He taught me to keep the ledger when I was 9. Gave me a little brass key off his own ring, the kind that used to wind a library card catalog, and he closed my fingers around it and said, "You're my record keeper now." I didn't know what that meant. I thought it was a game. I still wear that key on my key ring today. It is the smallest key I own, and for 32 years I had no idea what it actually opened. By 14, I was reconciling the company's accounts at that lake house kitchen table, while Tucker, who was 9, ran the dock with a fishing pole. By 19, I had my own desk in the glass office. By 25, I was doing payroll, taxes, vendor contracts, the insurance, the licensing for both states. I labeled everything. I dated everything. I double-filed everything. One copy in the active drawer and one in the archive boxes in the back. The way Asa did it, the way his daddy probably did it before there was such a thing as a computer. The family had a name for me, the filing cabinet. Tucker said it first at Thanksgiving when I was maybe 27, and it stuck the way cruel small things stick in families, the ones everybody agrees are just teasing. Don't ask me, ask the filing cabinet. Maribel's gonna want a receipt for that hug. They laughed. I laughed. I'd learned to laugh on cue by then, the way you learn to flinch. Here's the thing nobody at that cookout knew, the thing I'm only now able to say plain. I knew exactly the day I stopped being a daughter and started being a department. I was 14. It was a Saturday at the showroom. A customer, a contractor named Briggs, who bought from us for years, was admiring how clean the back office ran, and my father put his arm around Tucker, who was 9 and had glued 2 sample squares to the floor that morning. And Dale said, "Oh, the boy's the future. Maribel here, she's just good with numbers. Just good with numbers. I have been just something ever since. Just the bookkeeper, just the back office, just the one who never needed the spotlight. I built a habit out of that word. If I was only ever going to be just, then I'd be the most thorough just anybody ever saw. I'd keep records so clean that the truth would have nowhere to hide, even if I didn't know yet what truth I was keeping it for. If you've ever been the person in the family who got handed the responsibility and none of the credit, the one they call reliable to your face and boring behind your back, you already know the exact weight of a salad bowl you can't put down. After the toast, the cookout went on like cookouts do. Somebody got the horseshoes out. My aunt asked me where the extra ice was, because of course she asked me, I was the one who'd know. I told her. The chest freezer in the welding bay. 2 bags, the receipts in the green folder if anyone needs it for the books. She laughed like I'd made a joke. Tucker found me by the coolers around dusk. He had a beer in one hand and the brass keys in the other, and he was riding that particular high a man gets when a room has just told him he matters. "No hard feelings, Mayor," he said. He always called me Mayor, like the horse. Dad just thinks the face of the company ought to be, you know, a face people picture buying floors from. "You'll do good," I said. "You'll still run the back stuff, right? The boring stuff. I'd be lost in all those boxes." He grinned. "You love that boring stuff." I said, "Okay, that's all." Just okay. He clapped me on the shoulder and went to go let people take pictures of him with the keys. And I stood there in the warm dark with the glue smell coming off the warehouse, cedar and linseed and the chemical sweetness of the adhesive we used, the smell I'd known since I was a kid, and I made a decision so quiet I almost didn't notice making it. I was not going to fight my family. I was going to go home, and I was going to leave the way I did everything, on paper, cleanly dated and filed. I went back to the office that same night. The cookout was still loud out behind the building, but the showroom was dark and cool, and mine for a few more hours. I let myself into the glass office with my own key, the regular one, and I sat down at the desk I'd sat at for 22 years. I wrote my resignation by hand first, then typed it. 2 sentences. I have served Renner Sons faithfully, and I am stepping down effective immediately. I dated it. I signed it. I made 2 copies, one for the active file and one for the archive, because 30 years of habit does not stop just because your heart is doing something complicated. Then I packed my desk into 3 boxes. I'm telling you, it took less than an hour. 22 years, and it fit in 3 banker's boxes, and most of what was in them wasn't even mine. It was the company's. So I left 2 of the boxes right there and carried out only the one. A photo of Asa at the lake, my coffee mug. The little succulent that somehow hadn't died, my key ring, with the brass library key on it that I'd never taken off. On the way out, I stopped at the archive room. I don't fully know why. The boxes were all there, hundreds of them, every invoice and contract and tax filing going back further than I'd been alive, labeled in my handwriting and, on the oldest ones, in Asa's. I stood in the doorway and looked at them. Tucker had already told the contractor doing the showroom renovation that he wanted that room cleared out. More display space, he said. Who needs paper anymore? I turned off the light and I left. I figured those boxes were the company's problem now. I was wrong about that, but it would be 3 weeks before I found out how wrong. The next morning, I woke up unemployed for the first time since I was 19, and the strangest thing happened. The phone didn't ring. Nobody called to ask where the ice was or which folder or whether the quarterly was filed. My father didn't call. Tucker didn't call. My own family had a company keys ceremony for one of us and a quiet exit for the other on the same Saturday, and not one of them picked up the phone to see how I was sitting with it. So I sat with it alone, the way I sat with most things. 3 weeks later, I was at the Olive Street branch of the bank, the one 2 blocks down from the warehouse, closing out the small personal account I'd kept there for years because I didn't want to drive past my old life every time I needed cash. The branch manager came out from behind her glass herself when she saw my name on the slip, Odessa Hartley. She'd handled Renner Sons accounts for going on 2 decades. Sharp gray bob, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of woman who remembers your account number and your mother's funeral. She asked me to come sit at her desk. I thought it was about a fee or a form. She slid a manila folder across the desk toward me. She didn't open it. She just put 2 fingers on top of it and looked at me over those glasses, and she lowered her voice even though the branch was nearly empty. "Your grandfather opened an account I was told never to close," Odessa said. "It's still open. It's been open the whole time." She paused, and her fingers didn't move off that folder. "You should ask why." I asked why, of course. I'm a bookkeeper. Why is the only question I've ever really had. Odessa Hartley folded her hands on top of that manila folder and she told me what she could, which wasn't much because she was a careful woman in a careful profession and she'd been carrying this particular knowledge for a long time without anybody to give it to. In 2009, she said, "Your grandfather came in and opened a separate account. Not a company account. Not a personal one either, not exactly. It's held under an instrument I'm not at liberty to read to you, but I can tell you it has standing instructions attached. And the first instruction is that this account is never to be closed, never to be drawn down, and never to be folded into the operating reserve no matter who asks." She looked at me. "People have asked, Maribel. My father asked." She didn't answer that. She didn't have to. The not answering was the answer, the way it is with careful people. The second instruction, she said, is that if anyone ever comes in here who can demonstrate they hold the complete company archive, the whole record, beginning to end, I'm to direct them to Lyle Pickett's office downtown. He's the trust attorney. He's got something for that person. She slid the folder a half-inch closer to me. Asa told me to my face the day he set it up that someday a Renner would walk in, here who'd been told they were just the help, and that I'd know them when I saw them. She took her glasses off. I think I'm looking at them. I drove home along State Line Avenue with my hands at 10 and 2 and the folder on the passenger seat, and I crossed back and forth between Texas and Arkansas at every light without noticing, which is a thing you can do in Texarkana your whole life and stop seeing, 1 boot in each state. The floor doesn't care what state it's in. Here's what I want you to understand. I did not believe I was about to inherit anything. I have never in my life expected to be handed a thing. What I felt sitting at that red light was smaller and stranger than hope. It was the feeling of being addressed, of someone, 15 years dead now, having left a sentence in a drawer with my name on the inside of it. The complete company archive, beginning to end. I was the only person alive who knew where most of it was, and I knew, with a cold drop in my stomach, that a good third of it was about to go in a dumpster. I called the showroom the next morning. Not Tucker. I called Ronaldo, the foreman, a man who'd worked the loading dock for 19 years, and called me ma'am, even though I'd asked him 100 times not to. I asked him, casual as I could make it, how the renovation was coming. "They cleared the archive room yesterday, Miss Maribel," he said, and I could hear him being careful too. The whole town apparently full of careful people protecting me from things. Tucker had us haul it all to the roll-off out by the dock, said it was just old paper. Is the roll-off still there? Pickup's Thursday. It was Wednesday. I want to tell you I'm proud of what I did next, but pride isn't the word. I drove to Olive Street to the warehouse I'd been all but exiled from, and I parked on the street so nobody would see my car in the lot, and I walked back along the chain link to the loading dock where the big green roll-off container sat in the heat with the lid flapped open, and I climbed in. 41 years old in the good slacks I'd worn to the bank because I didn't own clothes for dumpsters anymore. I climbed up on a pallet and over the lip and down into a container full of my own handwriting. 40 years of it. Boxes split open, invoices fanned out across busted drywall and ceiling tile, and the foam corners off some new display unit. The whole history of Renner and Sons, rained on once already, smelling of mildew and the sweet rot of wet cardboard. And right there, near the bottom, under a slab of broken particle board, I found it. A black 3-ring binder, the vinyl gone gray and crackled, the spine hand lettered in my grandfather's all-capital print, Renner and Sons, Incorporation, 1974, the original, the articles, the first license for the Arkansas side and the first for the Texas side, the founding share structure, Asa's signature and fountain pen gone brown at the edges, the single most important document the company owned, and my brother had thrown it in a dumpster because it was old paper, and he wanted more room to display engineered oak. I sat down right there on the wet cardboard, and I held that binder against my chest like it was a person. And I'll be honest with you, that was the moment I cried. Not at the cookout, not at the bank. In a dumpster on Olive Street with the Union Station clock tower looking down at me, holding the one thing nobody else thought was worth keeping. You know the type by now. The man who throws away the foundation to make room for the showroom and calls it progress because he never once read what was written on the spine. I took the binder. I took 9 more boxes, the ones that hadn't soaked through, loading them into my trunk and my back seat 2 at a time, sweating through that good blouse, and I drove them to the climate-controlled storage unit I rented that same afternoon on the Arkansas side. Then I went back to my house, and I did the thing I am actually good at, the thing they named me for. I rebuilt the archive. It took me 5 weeks. I had the dumpster boxes, damaged, but mostly legible. I had the second copies, the archive duplicates I'd squirreled away for 30 years in the back boxes, the ones Tucker never knew existed because filing in duplicate struck everybody as exactly the kind of pointless thing the filing cabinet would do. I had digital scans on 3 hard drives. Between the originals I'd saved, the copies I'd doubled, and the wreck I'd hauled out of the roll-off, I reconstructed the complete record of Renner Sons Flooring, 1974 to the present. Every invoice, every contract, every tax filing, every license renewal for both states, cross-indexed and dated and labeled. And while I did it, I read. Really read. The way you don't when you're just filing to stay ahead of the work. And the company I found in those boxes was not the company I thought I'd spent my life keeping books for. There was a man named Mr. Polk, Eldon Polk, the welder who'd fabricated our dock railings and pallet racks for decades. A quiet man the family had written off years ago as somebody Asa carried too long. I'd always heard it that way. Asa was soft on Polk. Then I found them, tucked in a folder marked only with a number, going back to 1998. Payments, steady, monthly, routed through that separate account Odessa had warned me never closes. Medical payments, Mr. Polk's wife had been sick for a long time before she passed, and the bills had been more than a welder could carry. And somewhere in there, my grandfather had quietly decided that a man who'd built the bones of his warehouse wasn't going to lose his house over it. He never said a word, not to Polk, who got the bills marked paid and never knew by whose hand, not to the family, who thought he was just soft. He kept it in the books, though, because Asa kept everything in the books. He just kept it where only the record keeper would ever look. And there was Lurleen Stagg, the bookkeeper before me, the woman whose desk I inherited at 19 and whose handwriting I'd learned to read on the oldest ledgers. I'd always assumed she just retired. In the folders, I found the truth of her, too. Asa had paid for her night classes at the community college on the Texas side. 2 years of accounting courses, so that a single mother running his front office could get the certificate that doubled her pay somewhere better when she was ready to go. He'd trained his own bookkeeper right out the door and into a better life, on purpose, and funded it quietly, and recorded it where the next record keeper would someday find it and understand. That's when I started to understand what the account was. It wasn't a slush fund. It was Asa's conscience, kept in ledger form, a private account for the debts the company owed people that the company would never officially admit to owing, and he'd built it to outlive him. He'd built it so that no son of his could ever drain it to cover a bad bet, because the instructions said it could never be closed, never be drawn down, never be folded in. People had asked, Odessa said. My father asked. I sat with that a long time. Then, in the bottom of the 1974 binder behind the original articles, pressed flat against the back cover where it had ridden along for 50 years, I found a single page I had never seen before. A codicil, an amendment to the founding trust, typed on the thin onion skin they used back then, and at the bottom, in fountain pen, 2 sets of initials. The first was Asa's, A.R. I'd know it anywhere. And next to it, smaller, in a different hand, were 2 more letters and a question mark someone had penciled in the margin beside them, long ago, maybe by a clerk who couldn't make them out. M.A.R. and M.I. am Maribel Renner. My mother was Marguerite. The bookkeeper before me was Lurleen, not an M. And the date on that codicil was 1985. I was born in 1985. I sat at my own kitchen table, the way I'd sat at the lake house table at 14, with a dead man's handwriting in front of me. And I did the arithmetic I am very, very good at. And the arithmetic said something I could not yet prove. It said that before I was old enough to hold a pencil, before my father ever told a contractor I was just good with numbers, somebody had written a letter that might have been the first letter of my name into the bones of this company. I didn't sleep that night. I called Lyle Pickett's office in the morning. His secretary asked if I could demonstrate that I held the complete company archive. She asked it like a password, like she'd been waiting years to ask somebody. I told her I had it indexed in a storage unit on the Arkansas side, and she could come count the boxes herself. There was a pause. Then she said, Mr. Pickett would see me Thursday, and that he'd been the one who notarized something for my grandfather a long time ago, and that he'd always wondered if anyone would ever come to claim it. While I was doing all of this, quietly on paper, my brother Tucker was running the company my father gave him into the ground, and he didn't even know it yet. I knew it because I still got the bank notices forwarded to my house, an oversight nobody had thought to correct. I knew the operating reserve was thin in a way that didn't match a company that had just thrown a 50-year party. I knew there was a loan renewal coming due, a big one, with the lake house pledged against it, and that the renewal needed signatures and records to go through, records Tucker no longer had, because they were in a storage unit in Arkansas, indexed and dated and double-filed, under the name of the only Renner anybody ever called a filing cabinet. I drove out to Lyle Pickett's office on Thursday with the 1974 binder on the seat beside me, buckled in like a passenger, because I did not trust the heat of a parked car with the only original we had left. His office was downtown, up a narrow stair over what used to be a shoe store, the kind of lawyer who'd never moved because his clients knew where to find him. He was older than my father, with hands that shook a little, pouring the coffee, and not at all when he opened the file. He looked at me a long time before he said anything, the way Odessa had, the way Ronaldo had, the way the whole town seemed to look at me now that I'd started asking the only question I knew how to ask. You favor him, Lyle Pickett said finally, around the eyes. Asa had that same way of waiting for a man to finish lying before he answered. I told him I'd brought the archive index. I told him the boxes were in a unit off the Arkansas side, and he was welcome to send anyone he liked to count them. He waved that off with one shaking hand. He said he didn't need to count them. He said the fact that I'd reconstructed them at all, after Tucker put them in the roll-off, told him everything the trust needed to know about who I was. Then he told me about the trust. In 1985, my grandfather had restructured the founding agreement of Renner Sons Flooring, not the operating company, the holding trust above it, the thing that actually owned the controlling shares. Most family companies, Lyle said, pass control by blood, oldest son, or by paper, whoever's name the patriarch signs. Asa had done neither. Asa had written that the controlling block of Renner and Sons would pass to whoever physically held and maintained the complete corporate archive, the entire record of the company beginning to end, and could demonstrate it. Not the oldest, not the loudest, the keeper. He believed, Lyle Pickett said, that the person who saves the record is the person who can be trusted with the company, because they're the only one who'll never lie to it. You can lie to people, Maribel. You cannot lie to a ledger you yourself have kept. He used to say that to me right there in that chair you're sitting in. He closed the file. Everyone assumed he meant a metaphor, a spirit, stewardship. He did not mean a metaphor. He meant the boxes. He meant the actual boxes. I asked him why nobody knew, why my father didn't know, why Tucker didn't know, why a clause that decided the whole company had sat in a drawer for 40 years while the family handed keys over barbecue. Lyle Pickett took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Your father knew, he said. Dale came to me in 2010 after Asa passed and asked me to set the trust aside, to unwind it. He said it was unworkable, that it would cause confusion. He put the glasses back on. I told him I was not at liberty to unwind a thing your grandfather had locked. He didn't like that. He came back twice. He looked at me steadily. Your father has spent 15 years hoping the archive would simply rot in that warehouse and the clause would have nothing to attach to. Old paper. That's why your brother was told to clear the room. I'd bet my license on it. I sat with that. Old paper. Who needs paper anymore? More display space. I thought about Tucker telling the contractor to haul it to the dumpster, and I wondered, for the first time, whether Tucker had ever known what he was throwing out, or whether he'd just been told by Dale that it was junk and believed it the way he believed everything our father told him, easily, with his whole open face. There's one more thing, Lyle Pickett said, and I've been holding it longer than I've held anything in this profession. He reached into his desk and brought out a single sealed envelope, and on the front of it, in my grandfather's all-capital print, were the words, "For the one who keeps the ledger," the same hand from the binder spine, the same hand from the codicil. My hands were not steady when I took it. Inside was not a letter. Inside was a single index card, and on it, in Ace's print, 4 lines. The first line said, "You found the boxes. Good girl." The second line said, "The proof of who you are is not in this office." The third line said, "It is where you and I used to keep the things that mattered." And the fourth line said, "You still have the key." I sat in that chair over the old shoe store, and I cried for the second time in a month. Quiet, the way I do everything, and Lyle Pickett pretended to look out his window while I did it, because I knew exactly what key. I had been wearing it since I was 9 years old, the little brass library card key on my ring, the one I'd never taken off, the one my grandfather pressed into my palm at the kitchen table the day he caught me reconciling his books for fun and called me his record keeper. I'd thought it opened a card catalog drawer somewhere, some old library thing, a sweet, useless gift to a strange, quiet child. I'd carried it through 40 years and 3 cars and 1 divorce because it was the only thing anyone in my family had ever given me that came with a name attached that I liked. It was not a library key. I knew, sitting there, exactly where it went. The lake house on Wright Patman. I want you to understand the position my father was in by then, because it matters for what came next, and because the man genuinely believed he was protecting something. Dale Renner had not stolen for a yacht. I have looked at every number now, and I can tell you what the money did. Tucker had opened a flooring distribution venture in 2016 that failed inside 2 years. He'd opened a second one, a luxury tile import thing, that failed faster. Each time, the losses had been quietly absorbed by the company's reserve account, the operating cushion that a 50-year-old business is supposed to keep against a bad quarter. And the lake house, Asa's lake house, the one place that was supposed to belong to all of us, had a balloon mortgage on it that my father had taken out to cover the gap and never told a soul. He had hollowed the reserve to keep his son from looking like a failure, and now the loan that held it all together was coming up for renewal. And the bank, before it would roll a loan that size, wanted to see clean records and a stable succession, a name on the company that the numbers trusted. My father had crowned Tucker the next Renner man, not because Tucker had earned a company, but because Dale needed a male heir's signature on a renewal, fast, before anyone looked too closely at where the cushion had gone. The cookout was not a celebration. The cookout was a closing. His hidden fear had a shape now, and the shape was a banker, asking for documents he no longer had, because the documents were mine. I drove out to the lake on a Sunday evening when I knew the family wouldn't be there, down the long road through the pines to where the water of Wright Patman goes flat and copper at sundown. The lake house was the same as it had always been, the porch sagging at the same corner, the screen door with the same loose spring. I'd been coming here since before I could walk. There was a cedar cabinet built into the wall of the back room, a tall, narrow thing with a brass keyhole. And for as long as I'd been alive, the family story was that the key to it had been lost decades ago, and nobody had ever bothered to force it, because there was nothing in there but Asa's old fishing junk. Tucker, I would learn later, had tried 3 times to get it open after the keys ceremony, with a screwdriver and then with a pry bar, and had given up and decided to have the whole cabinet ripped out during the renovation. He was planning to extend to the lake house, too. More room, always more room with that boy. I took the brass library key off my ring. My hand was shaking the way Lyle Pickett's shook pouring coffee. I put it in the keyhole of the cedar cabinet and it turned like it had been oiled yesterday. Inside, on the middle shelf, sitting by itself on a folded square of flannel, was a round metal tin, the kind that holds a reel of recording tape, sealed around the lip with old tape gone amber, and across the top, in my grandfather's all-capital fountain pen print, the same hand, always the same hand, were the words, "For the one who keeps the ledger." I sat down on the floor of that back room with the lake going dark in the window, and I held the tin in my lap, and I did not open it. I want to be honest about that. I'd waited 41 years to be claimed by name, and I was suddenly terrified of what the dead man's voice might say, terrified it would be a metaphor after all, terrified it would say Tucker, terrified it would say nothing I could use. So I carried it home unopened. There was something I had to do first, because a voice on a tape, played alone in my kitchen, proves nothing. My grandfather, who never did a thing where only the record keeper could see it without also doing it where the record could hold it, had taught me that without ever saying it out loud. A thing only counts if it's witnessed and entered. So I called Lyle Pickett, and I called Odessa Hartley, and I made some careful arrangements. And then I did the one loud thing I have ever done in my life. I requested in writing, through the trust attorney of record, an emergency meeting of the board of Renner Sons Flooring to address an irregularity in the corporate succession and the security of the company's outstanding loan obligations. You should know what that board was. 5 seats, my father, Dale, my brother Tucker, my Aunt Carol, Dale's sister, who voted however Dale told her to, and had brought a casserole to every event of my life without ever once learning what I did for the company. And 2 outside seats held by men Asa had named decades ago, an old supplier named Hollis Webb, and a retired banker named Sutton. Men I'd been mailing financials to for 20 years, men who, it turned out, knew my handwriting better than they knew my brother's face. I got the meeting because the trust attorney requested it, and the trust attorney could not be refused, and I think my father said yes because he could not imagine, even then, even with everything, that the filing cabinet was about to do anything but ask a quiet question and be sent home. He'd been telling himself a story about me for 41 years. She never needed the spotlight. She wouldn't want the headaches. A daughter wouldn't want this. He'd told it so long it had become the floor he stood on, and he had no idea I was about to walk in, carrying the one thing in the world that could pull it out from under him, in a round metal tin, on a folded square of flannel, in my grandfather's own voice. They held it in the showroom, after hours, among the engineered oak displays Tucker had cleared the archive to make room for, folding chairs in a half circle on the new floor. I came in last, the way I'd come in last to everything my whole life, holding a banker's box instead of a potato salad, and I set it on the display table in the middle of the half circle, and I sat down with my hands folded, and I waited for them to finish looking at me before I said a single word. They finished looking. My father looked the longest, the way a man looks at a column of figures he is sure adds up until it doesn't. Tucker looked the least, because Tucker had never in his life believed that the quiet sister in the corner of any room was the part of the room he needed to watch. My Aunt Carol looked at the casserole she had not brought, because there had been no instruction to bring one to this, and that absence had frightened her more than anything I could have said. Hollis Webb and Old Man Sutton looked at me the way you look at a letter you have been expecting for 20 years that has finally come in the mail. I unfolded my hands. I said good evening, and I thanked them for coming, and I told them I would not take long, because I had never in my life taken long, and they all knew it. Then I asked Tucker, gently in front of the board, whether the company could produce its founding records for the bank's renewal review, which was due in 11 days. I knew the date. I had the notice in my house. I asked it the way you ask a child where his shoes are when you can already see them on his feet. Tucker laughed. The easy laugh, the showroom laugh, the one that had sold 1,000 square feet of engineered oak on Olive Street to people who came in for vinyl. He said of course we could. The records were in the building. They'd always been in the building. Dale didn't laugh. Dale had gone very still, the way the lake goes still, right before the wind finds it, because Dale was the only other person in that half circle who had spent 15 years hoping a particular stack of paper would quietly cease to exist. I reached into the banker's box and I lifted out the 1974 binder, the original incorporation binder, the one with the cracked spine and ASA's all-capital print along the edge, the one my brother had thrown into a roll-off dumpster behind the loading dock during his renovation, the one I had climbed in after at 61 years of being told I was too careful about nothing. I set it on the display table on top of the new floor. I did not say where it had been. I let Tucker's own face say it. I watched him recognize it, watched the laugh drain out of him from the chin up, because some part of him remembered giving the order, haul that old stuff out who keeps paper. And now the old stuff was sitting in front of the board with its date showing. Then I nodded to Lyle Pickett, who had been sitting at the end of the half circle the whole time in a brown suit, older than Tucker, holding a leather folder on his knees that nobody had thought to ask about. Lyle stood. His hands shook opening the folder and went still when he began to read, the same way they had in his office over the old shoe store. He read the trust. He read the section of the founding agreement that Asa Renner had restructured in 1985, the section that said the controlling block of Renner Sons Flooring passed not to the eldest, not to the appointed, but to whoever physically held and could demonstrate the complete corporate archive of the company. He read it slowly, in a flat country voice, the way you read scripture to people who have stopped listening in church, and I watched it land on each face in turn. My Aunt Carol said, "That can't be right, Dale. Tell him that can't be right." My father said nothing. Hollis Webb said, "I'll be damned, Asa," under his breath, to a man who wasn't in the room. Tucker said, "Wait, what does demonstrate mean? What does that mean? Hold the archive." And his voice had climbed up out of the showroom register into someplace younger, someplace I almost felt sorry for. I answered him, because no one else would. I said it meant the boxes, Tucker. The ones in the dumpster. It meant somebody had to have kept every invoice and every ledger and every contract from 1974 forward, indexed and dated, and be able to put their hand on any one of them. I said the bank could not renew the loan against the lake house without those records, and the records the company needed to survive were not the company's anymore. They were in a storage unit on the Arkansas side of State Line Avenue, 11 minutes from where we sat, and they were filed under the name of the only person in this family anyone ever called a filing cabinet. That was when my father finally spoke. He said my name, just my name, Maribel, the way he'd said it across the lake house table when I was 14, and he wanted me to pass him something. He said, "You don't want this." He said, "This is headaches you have no idea about. This is banks and lawyers and payroll at 2 in the morning. He said, "I kept you out of this to protect you." And there it was, the whole architecture of 41 years, said out loud at last in a half circle of folding chairs. He had built a daughter in his head who did not want the thing she had quietly built with her own 2 hands, and he had loved that daughter in his way, and he had never once gone looking for the real one. I did not argue with him. I have never been any good at arguing, and I did not need to be. I reached into the box one more time and I brought out the tin. I want to tell you what that room sounded like when I set it on the table. Nothing. The compressor on the showroom's display cooler kicked on and off. Somewhere out on Olive Street, a truck went by toward the rail yard. Sutton, the retired banker, leaned forward in his chair with both hands on his cane. Because Sutton knew what a reel-to-reel tin was, and he could read Asa's print from across the new floor, the words my grandfather had put on the lid for the one person he trusted to come and find it. I had brought the machine too. The old woolen sock from a shelf in the lake house back room, the one Asa used to record himself reading the year-end figures aloud because he liked to hear whether the numbers sounded honest. I set it beside the tin, and I plugged it into the wall the renovation had moved, but not removed. I lifted the lid off the tin and I blew across it, and 15 years of dust came up off the reel and turned gold in the showroom lights and drifted down onto the engineered oak my brother had cleared the archive to display. I threaded the tape the way my grandfather taught me to thread it when I was 9 years old and could barely reach the spindles. Over, under, around the head, onto the take-up reel, and I pressed the lever down. There was the long hiss of old tape. There was the scrape of a chair in a room that no longer exists, recorded in a year I will not say out loud. And then there was my grandfather's voice, Asa Renner, gravel and patience, filling a showroom full of his own descendants who had not heard him in over a decade. He said his name and the date, the way he did everything, for the record. He talked for a minute about the company, about the cedar pallets and the glue and the loading dock and the clock tower across the street that he'd set his watch by since 1974. And then he said the thing the tin had been waiting all those years in a locked cedar cabinet to say. He said the company goes to the one who kept the ledger. He said that was always Maribel. He said it plain, no flourish, the way you'd state a measurement. He said she was reconciling my books at the kitchen table at 9 years old because she loved the truth of a number. And a person who loves the truth of a number cannot be bought and cannot be lied to and will never lie to you. And that is the only kind of person you hand a company. He said, I gave her the key already. She'll know which door. And then, quieter, almost off the record, he said, tell her I knew. Tell her I always knew which one of them was mine. The tape ran on into hiss. Nobody moved to stop it. Aunt Carol was crying without sound. Hollis Webb had his hand over his mouth. And my father, Dale Renner, 68 years old, sat with his eyes closed and his jaw working, because the man on that tape was his own father, telling him in front of everyone that the thing he had spent 15 years trying to let rot had been the truest thing in the building all along. Then Odessa Hartley stood up. I had asked her to come, and she had come, in her good gray coat, carrying a folder of her own. She is not a dramatic woman. She is a bank manager from the Olive Street branch who has watched this family's money move for 30 years. She said, for the record, since we are making one, She said there was an account opened in 1985, the same year as the trust, that she had been instructed never to close by a customer who knew the bank better than the bank knew itself. She said that account had quietly funded a number of things over the years. It had paid a welder named Mr. Polk's medical bills for the better part of a decade, after the family wrote him off as finished. It had paid for night classes for a bookkeeper named Lurleen, so she could sit for her certification. And it had been structured, Odessa said, so that no officer of the operating company could touch it, drain it, or borrow against it. Which was why, she said, looking only at my father, it was the one account on God's green earth that Dale Renner's reserve raid had not been able to empty. The legacy he swore he was protecting had been protected the whole time, by the very man he thought he'd outlived, against him. She slid the folder onto the table next to the tin. She said, "Your grandfather opened a door I was told never to close. You should walk through it now." Then she sat back down and folded her hands, and she did not look at me like a woman who had saved me, because she hadn't. She had only kept the record, the same as I had, the same as Asa had, and let it do what records do when someone finally reads them out loud. The vote took 4 minutes. Hollis Webb made the motion. Sutton seconded it before Hollis finished the sentence. Aunt Carol raised her hand and did not look at her brother first, the only independent thing I ever saw her do. The 2 outside seats Asa named decades ago carried it, and my father, after a long moment, with his eyes still wet and something in his face I had waited my whole life to see and could not name, raised his hand too. Tucker abstained. He looked at me when he did it, and for once there was no showroom in his face, just my little brother, who'd been handed a thing he never built and was only now understanding he'd been set up to lose it. The brass keys to the building, the ones my father had pressed into Tucker's palm over barbecue with a toast about the future, slid across the display table toward me, pushed by my brother's own hand. I did not pick them up fast. I picked them up the way I do everything, carefully, and I set them down in front of me, and I let myself feel it land. 41 years. I did not say anything clever. There was nothing left to add to a man who'd already said it for me in his own voice. What came after was procedural, and I will keep it short the way the night kept it short. The bank could not renew a loan secured by a lake house the company no longer controlled with records the company could no longer produce, so it called the note, and the improperly hidden debt my father had buried came up into the daylight where a board could actually deal with it. We dealt with it. Asa's protected account, the one nobody was allowed to close, anchored the restructuring. The lake house on Wright Patman stayed in the family. My father kept a chair and his name on the door, because I am not in the business of throwing out what other people built, even when they tried to throw out me. The first thing I did as the one who sat in the chair was a small thing. There was a kid on the loading dock, 16, named Calvin, who swept cedar dust and got sent for coffee and got called slow because he was quiet and counted the pallets twice. I had watched him reconcile a delivery against a manifest one afternoon, on his own for no reason, just because the number bothered him. I made him a paid apprenticeship, the first the company ever had with his name on a real document, dated, double-filed. I told him the back office was not the part of the building that mattered less. I told him somebody told me that once, in his own way, and I'd been waiting 40 years to say it back to somebody. Late that night, after the chairs were folded and the lights cut, I stood alone in the office I'd occupied since I was 19, under the windows that faced the old Union Station clock tower across Olive Street. I slid the 1974 binder back onto its shelf where it belonged, spine out, Asa's print showing. Then I took the little brass library card key off the ring where I'd carried it since I was 9, looked at it under the clock, and slid it back on. She keeps every receipt now.